Go ahead and remind you that this whole series leads up to the 100th anniversary, right? September 14th. And the 100th anniversary of this congregation. And he wanted me to remind you to please go ahead and make your plans to be here. Invite your friends, invite mom and dad, invite your sister, invite your bubby, invite everybody. Because that's what it's all about. You know, we've been doing the church from Acts to Alabama. And I asked for the church from Revelation. And the church in Revelation is, you know, when you start talking about Revelation, people give you the old, Revelation. Really, you're going to get to do Revelation? And I'm okay with that. I like Revelation. Is it going? I'm okay with Revelation. I was hoping the projector will go in just a second. And I'm okay with Revelation. But before we get started, I wanted to tell you, have you noticed that when earlier in the series, when people were talking about the church in they had a tree. They had a tree that was budding, and the next guy came up and he had his PowerPoint and they had a tree. And the next guy came up and he had a PowerPoint and he had a tree. Now, we missed a few PowerPoints in there, but you'll notice that the PowerPoint now, right, it's a burning tree. And it's a burning tree because in Revelation, the church, what is represented by the tree, is burning. The tree is in trouble. The interesting thing is about Revelation, when you start looking at it, it has three characteristics. It's the characteristic of a letter. And when you look at a letter, you think, oh, a letter is situational. That means when 1 Corinthians was written, when Thessalonians was written, when Colossians was written, when Galatians was written, Paul was helping them to understand you don't have to pay attention to the Judaizing teachers anymore. When Corinthians was written, we think of Corinthians being one of the most problematic churches, the problem child of the New Testament, right? Same with Revelation. Revelation is a situational letter to a church that's in distress. Not only that, Revelation is filled with prophecy. We look in the very first verse, chapter 1, verse 3. If you'll go ahead and turn to Revelation, because we'll be all over it tonight. Chapter 1, verse 3. Blessed is he who reads and who hears the words of this prophecy. And if you went ahead and flipped all the way to the very end of the book, chapter 22, verse 10. Do not close up the pages of this prophecy. Because this whole book is about prophecy, and it's about things not only that are to come, but prophecy is also about forthtelling. Not just foretelling, but forthtelling. And God is helping them understand what's going to be going on in their lives, in their very lives. The third form of writing that's in Revelation is apocalyptic. And you can think of apocalyptic as a very intensified form of prophecy. I'm sorry, I know I'm going back and forth. I wander. You can think of apocalyptic writing as a very intensive form of prophecy. Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah, Revelation. You can think about Jesus when he gave the Olivet Discourse. The sun will be darkened, the moon will turn to blood. Great earthquake, everyone will feel it. That kind of idea. And the purpose of apocalyptic writing is to give people an understanding of what's going on, to give people an understanding of how things are going to affect them. And not only how things are going to affect them, but how things are going to work out, which is great, which is wonderful. Because, I mean, the Christians during this time, which goes to the date of the writing, most people think it was either have an early or a late date. The early date, Nero, before the fall of Jerusalem. Nero persecuted Christians. The late date, Domitian, after the fall of Jerusalem. Very much persecuted. These people were like eventually you'll see a picture of Polycarp. And he's standing with a bunch of Christians, and some of them are being burned. They were dipped in tar and burned alive for torchlight. I don't want to go through that. You know, somebody, Kyle Massengale, put up on his Facebook page today about some of the Christians in the Middle East who are having to make that same choice today. They're having to make the same choice. Do I say yes? Oh, there's Polycarp. Do I say, yes, I'm a Christian, pay a tax or die, or deny Christ? So people are making that choice today, even as we sit here comfortably. The most important thing to remember about the dating of Revelation is that it was written in the first century on purpose, because those people were in terrible, dire straits. The last thing is a little bit about how you interpret Revelation. Personally, I am a partial preterist with idealistic sprinkles. Right? I think that most of what you read in Revelation has happened in the first century. Most of what you read in Revelation has already taken place, except some of it toward the end, because we have clear prophecy that Jesus will come back. Idealistic sprinkles means sometimes I don't see literal happenings in the book of Revelation. I see an idealized language which helps us understand how the church is functioning in Revelation so that we can function ourselves. So with that in mind, I want to talk about the church in Revelation. The church in Revelation has three manifestations. Manifestation number one is the church in time. In other words, the church that was taking place in the first century. Now, if you were willing to participate, if you'll take a card from the front of the pew in front of you. If you have a pen or pencil, I want you to think about this and answer this question as I talk. If Jesus was going to write a letter to the Roebuck Parkway Church of Christ, what would that letter say? Okay? That's the question number one. If Jesus was going to write a letter to the Roebuck Parkway Church of Christ, what would that letter say? Now to the church in time. We think about that. One of the strongest images that we get of Jesus in Revelation is the fact that He is standing among 7 candlesticks, walking around with 7 stars in His hand. And we don't even have to wonder about what that is, because in chapter 1, verse 20, you have this. The mystery of the 7 stars, which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands and the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands which you saw are the 7 churches. And of course, he's talking about who? Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. If you take anything from that, take the fact that Jesus is writing to the church. And He's writing to the church of people who are having difficult times. People who are not as good as they're supposed to be. People who are flawed. I mean, look at the loveless church, starting in chapter 2, the church at Ephesus. Nevertheless, I have this against you, that you have left your first love. The persecuted church. Well, the persecuted church was pretty much okay. The compromising church, down here in verse 12. But I have a few things against you, because you have those there who hold to the doctrine of Balaam, and have taught that Balak and to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel. You keep going down to the corrupt church in Thyatira in verse 20. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants and to commit sexual idolatries. The dead church. Who wants to be the dead church? Who wants to be the dead church? The church at Sardis. These things says He who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your works, that you have a name and you are alive, but you are dead. You have the faithful church at Philadelphia, and then you have the lukewarm church. Who hasn't heard a lesson on the lukewarm church? Who hasn't heard a lesson on, I will spew you out of my mouth? You are neither hot nor cold. I will spew you. The word there is vomitorium. I will spew you out of my mouth. Each one of these congregations have something wrong, have a problem. And yet, he says, to the church at Ephesus, to him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. To the persecuted church, he who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. To the compromising church, to him who overcomes, I will give some hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone on which the new name will be written, which no one knows except him who receives it. To the corrupt church, and he who overcomes, I will keep my works unto the end of him, and I will give him power over the nations. To the dead church, He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father. To the faithful church, to him who overcomes, I'll make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. That's one of my favorite metaphors right there. A pillar in the church of God, in the temple of God, a pillar. Pillars don't go anywhere. Pillars stand up under the pressure. And then to the lukewarm church at Laodicea, whoever overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne as I have overcome, and sit down with my Father on his throne. Did you notice a theme? Did you notice a theme that went through every church? He who, what? I mean, you can talk, because, this is actually a class. So if I ask you a rhetorical question, it's not really rhetorical, right? He who does what? He who overcomes. And that's part of the message of the entire book. He who overcomes. And the message that Jesus gives to those 7 churches is he who overcomes. Once you get through the initial church in time, once you get through the initial church as it's presented in time, in the first century, with all its faults, and Jesus says, you still can overcome. You still can be part. Because remember, each one of them, he said something like, I'll make you a pillar, I'll give you a white stone, I'll give you a new name. Every one of those things. You can still take it to the bank that those churches were redeemable. He who overcomes. Now, after you get done with that, you get a wonderful vision in chapter 4 of God on his throne room. You get a beautiful vision of God in heaven, sitting on his throne, being who he is. Right? And then you get a wonderful vision in chapter 5 of Jesus. Who is worthy to take the scroll? Who is worthy to pick up the scroll? And then we get a picture of Jesus. Jesus is worthy. He's the one that can pick up the scroll and break the seals. Now I want to ask you a question before we get into the seals. What social ill, this is question number 2, what social ill do you think faces the church today? What social ill do you think faces the church today in such a way that it will hinder us from being the church, that it will persecute us in such a fashion that we will not be able to be the church? Okay? Question number 1, if Jesus wrote us a letter, what would it say? Question number 2, what social ill do you think affects us the worst? It's wonderful when you start looking at from here on out, from chapter 6 to chapter 19 or so. You have, beginning with the seals, and then you go from the seals to the trumpets, and then you go from the trumpets to the bowls. And each one of these kind of stands parallel one to the next. Now, I understand people who have a very literal, chronological view of Revelation see each one of these things happening in time. See each one of these things occurring boom, 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 boom. But I got to remind you that if you can find a chronological sequence in Revelation, I'd be surprised. Number 2, there are some people who take this very literally. 100% literal. It is all 100% literal, every bit of it. I do not believe that. I believe these images are given to us for us to understand what's going on in Revelation. I think these images are given to us so we can fathom, so actually given to the first century Christians, so they could fathom what's going on around them to such an extent that they can understand and draw strength. Okay? So you have the seals. When you're talking about the seals, you're talking about revelation. You're talking about the seals were a revelation. The trumpets show forth the judgment. The bowls show forth the wrath of God. What's to come, what's going to happen, and then it happens. Huh? God follows the standard protocol. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And He follows it. As you go through the seals, you have, of course, the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, the pale horse. Then you have an earthquake that shakes the entire earth. Not an earthquake, but a quake of the earth, because everybody feels it. Okay? Then you have an interlude. Now, I understand some people see these very literal. Again, some very literal people. But this is one thing I do know, that these things that happen, all these seals that are there as they're broken, the pestilence, the scales, the famine, the death, all these things happen, and the church is in the midst of it. Did you catch that? The church is in the middle of all this stuff going on. Wait, I'm supposed to pound the pulpit. Right in the middle of it. Right? I mean, they're right smack in the middle of it. When you do the seals, the church is right there. When you get to the trumpets, the church is right there. When you get to the bowls, the church is right in the middle of it. And then, between the sixth and seventh seal, and between the sixth and seventh trumpet, you have an interlude, and you have a vision of the church. In chapter 7, you find the 144,000. You can go online right now, type in the 144,000 of Revelation, and you can come up with page upon page upon page upon page upon page. It's amazing. If you'll look, I want to show you something definite about that 144,000. Verse 4, 7 verse 4. And I heard the number of those who were sealed. Sealed. 144,000. Now, if you turned over to Ephesians 4:30, you would find out that Christians are sealed with something, the Holy Spirit. What does being sealed mean? What does it mean for you to be sealed? Set apart, confirmed, part of something special. That's what sealed means. And these 144,000 and they go through the tribes of Judah. One of them's missing, right? If you actually go through this and read it very closely, you'll find out that Dan is being replaced with Manasseh. And then you'll find out that Ephraim has been replaced with Joseph. What can this mean? More than likely it means that it's not supposed to represent the tribes of Israel. And then if you go on into verse 9, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude. You know what I see here? I see two visions of the church. One is physical, on earth. One is in heaven. I read a story about a preacher who described the church as two-storied. Church on earth, church in heaven. Two-story church. That's us. And when you look at this, you are finding out that the church still exists among the terrible wrath that comes about with the seals. The terrible wrath. And yet the church is still there. Eventually, you get into, from about 9 to 16, you get into some of that apocalyptic, prophetic writing. He says, verse 14, and I said, Sir, you know, because he was asking, who are these people in white robes, right? He says, Sir, you know. And so he said to me, he's talking about the angel, these are the ones who came out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Another example of that apocalyptic writing. How do you wash white robes in blood and they turn out white? I mean, we understand white. We understand blood. It's apocalyptic writing. That's the difference there. Think about what 1 Corinthians 6:11 says. Or 1 Peter 3:21. What does that tell us? 1 Corinthians, he says, you have been washed. You were sanctified. You had yourself washed. In 1 Peter 3:21, he says what? Baptism, which now in the likewise saves you. Same thing. Washed in the blood of the Lamb. Then you keep going through, and you get to the seventh seal, and then all of a sudden you get into the trumpets. And the same thing happens. You go through all the trumpets, and you find out that the trumpets actually only strike about a third of the people in the world. And yet, who is living through the trumpets? The church. Y'all are on it. I like it. The church. And as you go through and you look through the church, eventually you get down to chapter 11. Just before chapter 11, John eats the little book. You know, Revelation is filled with some of the most vivid figurative language. A lot of it comes from the Old Testament. When John eats the little book, that's straight out of, thank you so much, Ezekiel. Because Ezekiel eats the little book. And he says, it tastes like honey in my mouth. In Psalms, the psalmist says, thy words I have devoured, I've eaten your words. And John eats the little book. It was bitter in his stomach. Then you get down here to chapter 11, and all of a sudden, you have two witnesses. Oh, friends, you can go online and you can find all kind of great stuff about the two witnesses. They are, oh, look, we're right at them. They're all over the place, the two witnesses. Who are the two witnesses? Oh, John the Revelator and Christ. Oh, the two witnesses in Zechariah 4 are Zechariah and Zerubbabel, I believe. One represents a social, one represents a religious leader. And yet these two witnesses are, if it tells us who they are, let's pay attention to it. Who does it say they are? Look down at verse 4. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands standing before God, before the God of the earth. The two olive trees. You remember in Romans, Paul makes a imagery, and he says, you know, you being the wild olive tree have been grafted in to the real olive tree. Sounds like the church, doesn't it? Sounds familiar. And then when he talks about the lampstand, remember the 7 lampstands at the beginning? How many of them were not, or how many of them were faithful, basically? 2. One was the faithful church, Philadelphia. One was the persecuted church, Smyrna. Is that right, Smyrna? 2 churches remained faithful. And if you look, no matter what you say the two witnesses are, 2 things have remained constant from the beginning of time and will remain constant to the end of time. The Word and the church. 2 witnesses. The Word, which this is one of its incarnations. One of its incarnations was coming through Moses. One of its incarnations came through the patriarchs. One of its incarnations came and walked on the earth with us. One of its incarnations we can hold in our hands. Smell the pages. The Word. What's the other? The church. Of all the things that it could be, the Word and the church stand firm throughout time. The Word and the church. And these 2 witnesses, which are very interesting. Yeah, I like that one. Isn't that funny? It's Legos. That's the beast out of the sea. That's pretty funny stuff, isn't it? I thought that one was great. 2 things about the witnesses. Number 1, they die. What? They die? They're killed? They're destroyed? They are. And look what happens in chapter 11, verse 10. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry and send gifts to one another, because the 2 prophets tormented those who dwelt on the earth. You know, in 1 Corinthians 2, 2 Corinthians 2, Paul makes a very interesting analogy. He says we are the aroma of Christ. To the unbeliever, we are the aroma of death. To the believer, we're the aroma of life. Why is that? Why is that? Why do people not like it when you're around? Theoretically, it should be because they see in you what they are not doing. They see in you something that is different, and they don't know how to handle it. Why don't you come out and go drinking with us? Why don't you come out and go carousing with us? Because that's not me. I'm sure most of you have people that you work with who love to come in on Monday morning and tell you all about how wonderful the weekend they had. Sure. That's fine. We are a witness against them. That's part of that right there. That's why they rejoiced. You'll also notice in chapter 11, verse 11, they come back to life. The world can't kill the church, and the world cannot kill the two witnesses. It's good stuff, isn't it? I want to stop for a second and point out verse 15. Most of the time when I do my Bible and I study, I end up putting a little key next to a verse. A book might have a key. And I really believe that if there's a key to Revelation, it's found in verse 15 of chapter 11. Listen. And then the seventh angel sounded, the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and His Christ, and He shall reign forever and ever." Again, you've come back to that one word that you saw at the end of every one of the letters to the churches. You've come back to that very same word. What was it? Overcome. Overcome. Finally, you get down to chapter 12. And in chapter 12, remember that apocalyptic writing? We understand what a woman is. We understand what the sun is. But sometimes we have a difficult time understanding what a woman clothed in the sun is. Sometimes we have a difficult time understanding that. Now this woman is pregnant. And the dragon is right there. Right there. Gonna take the baby, eat him. Now it's pretty clear that the baby is Christ. So that makes the woman who? Israel, right? Because who did Christ come from? Israel. After that, the woman is whisked away to a spot of safety. Again, I say that's the church. What was Israel called? What was Israel called in the Old Testament? The assembly, right? Those who were assembled. They were as much the church as we are the church. Just a different form of the church. And the church has taken on a new form today because of the sacrifice of Christ. And yet they were the church, just as much as we are the church. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that some beautiful illustration? More than likely, that's probably the last time you see the church in Revelation. I think it continues and appears, not the last time, but at least in this carnation. Remember what I said? In the first part, you have the church in time. And the church in time, the message to them was, you can overcome. Right? And in the middle of it, you had the church in what you might be saying is tribulation. All right? That's the second question. What bothers the church today? And you have the church in tribulation. And the message there is, you are going to overcome the tribulation you're in. I mean, these people were getting massacred. Burnt at the stake, dressed up like animals, put in the arena, and allowed to be fodder for wild animals. One of the Roman governors at the time wrote a letter, and he said, I'll have them come to me, and I'll give them a chance to burn the sacrifice, to burn the incense to Domitian or whoever, Nero, Domitian, whoever you think, whenever you think that was written. I'll give them a chance, and if they don't, I'll put them back in prison for a little bit longer. Then I'll bring them back out. And then if they still won't, that's when I put them in the games. That's when I put them in the games. The slideshow is getting close to the end. And they'll kill them. The last time you see the church in Revelation begins in verse 20. Or chapter 20, chapter 20. Chapter 20, 21, 22. This is the last incarnation of the church. The first incarnation was the church in time. And the second incarnation of the church in Revelation was the church in tribulation. The last incarnation of the church in Revelation is the church in triumph. Spoiler alert, we win. Right? Sorry. We win. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that grand? Isn't that glorious? We're on the winning side, friends. We're on the right side. That should make you so happy. You should be happy. You should smile about that, the fact that you are on the winning side. You have a great God in heaven who controls the world, the universe. And you're His child. You're His child. The picture's already passed by of the image of the angel coming down and locking Satan in the pit for 1,000 years. And I know we've all heard about the 1,000 years. I'm not going to go into the 1,000 years because my purpose is not to talk about that necessarily, but to talk about the church. So you get down here, and you get down to verse 11 of chapter 20. And when you get down to verse 11 of chapter 20, you find the church in judgment. Okay? Now, third question. What do you think will stand in the way of most people getting into heaven? Question number one, if Jesus was to write a letter to us, the Roebuck Parkway Church of Christ, what would it say? Question number two, what social ill threatens the life of the church today? Question number three, what do you think will stand in the way of most people making it into heaven when the time comes? Now back to this beautiful judgment scene. The dead come alive. The sea gives up its dead. The bride of Christ is taken to heaven. We're the bride of Christ, right? We're the church, the bride of Christ. And the church stands with everybody else at judgment. In fact, we didn't do that. It was almost as bad as banging the pulpit, wasn't it? We stand in judgment. You stand in judgment. I stand in judgment. When I stand in judgment, I'll not be able to say, well, my dad. No. I won't be able to say, well, of course, my son. No. I won't be able to say, the people who have known me since I was this tall. No. It will be you, me. Every man will have to give account of himself at judgment. Himself. And that judgment scene, the people are being moved off left and right. Remember, Jesus describes a very similar scene in Matthew. The people on one hand will go into perdition. The people on the other hand will go into glory. And let me guarantee you that the people who are going to go into glory are where? Already. In the church. Because you certainly can't make it outside the church. The only place there's safety is where? In the church. The only place you can be sure you're going to go to heaven from is in the church. There's only one place that has the safety and the security of being the bride of Christ. And that is where? In the church. In the church. That's so right. These people in the church are shown us how it works. And Jesus is writing, or John is getting this wonderful revelation of the end time. And John is getting this wonderful revelation and showing them, the people who are going through these persecutions, the people who are being killed because they do what? They say, I believe in Jesus Christ. And I believe that Jesus Christ is King. I believe Jesus Christ is Lord. And they're being killed for it. And these people need something to look forward to, don't you think? These people need something to look toward to help them understand. The people in the world today that see all of this having occurred, that see all this having already been done, say, Jesus has already come back. Jesus is already here and been here, and there's no return. I can't believe that. I want Jesus to come in the clouds. I'm ready for Jesus to come in the clouds. There's an old Indian proverb. You know what it says? It's a good day to die. Amen? Should be. Because if you're not ready to die right now, you're in the wrong place. Simple as that. If you're not ready to die right now, you're wrong. And he was trying to give them hope. People who were passing through some of the worst persecution in the world since time began. And he would want to give them hope. Hope. It's interesting that as you go through this, and he talks about this hope, he actually tries to quantify it. Right? He actually tries to say, this is what it looks like. Now remember, John is in the Spirit. He's been caught up to heaven in the Spirit. And he's trying to get us to understand something that cannot be described. Look in 21, verse 22 or so. It's pretty close, about 5 minutes. But I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city had no need of sun or the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it, and the Lamb is its light. And the nations and those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory and honor into it. Its gates shall not be shut at all by day, and there will be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it. But there shall by no means enter into it anything that defiles, or causes an abomination, or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Right? That's what you're seeing right there. The Lamb's book of life. In another place it says there will be no weeping there, no tears there. In another place it talks about 7 foundations of precious stone. 12 gates of solid pearl. It's beautiful. A street of gold. The river of life runs right through the middle of it. The tree of life stands in the midst of it. And we were able to eat of it. Oh, look. This is what not only they had to look forward to, but what we have to look forward to. Aren't you happy? Doesn't that give you a sense of security, a sense of relief? You know, everybody, when they're 18, is ready to go. You're ready. I'm done. I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to get out. Wherever it be. The military, that's what I did. College, get married, do something, but you're ready to leave. You are so ready to get out of the house. I don't want to live under mom and dad's roof anymore. I'm tired of being told to wash my clothes, brush my teeth, right? Be sure to wear clean clothes, right? Who wants all that? But you know what happens? I know y'all aren't probably going to believe this, but once you're out about 3 months, you start thinking, you know, I had clean clothes when I was at home. The sheets didn't have little sticky balls on them. I had hot meals. I'd just walk in and Mom would say, okay, what do you want for dinner, baby? Let me get you a cup of ice cream, baby. I love you so much. You need more milk? I'm always like, get up and get your own milk. Mama loves to get up and get milk. That's us. We stand here now in a world filled with trouble. We stand here now in a world that's filled with pain, trouble, trials. Have you seen the marquee that says, you know, you were never promised a safe passage, just a safe harbor? Right? The world is a nasty, mean, ugly, smelly place. Brothers and sisters, this is not our home. This is but temporary. Is any of this ringing a bell? Did you hear the phone? This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door. And I can't feel at home in this world anymore. I think there's just a couple more slides, and I'm going to continue to ramble until we're all the way to the end of them. Because the last slide tells you something very important. The last slide shows you something that is of extreme importance. Look over to Revelation 22, right at the very end of the book. He says there in verses 18 and 19, "For I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to these things, God will add to him the plagues that are written in the book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part of the book of life, from the holy city and from the things which are written in it." There is only one way to know what God wants for you. You will not feel it in your heart. You will not be walking down the street one day and get struck by a bolt of lightning. You will not have a dream and get carried into the stars and shown the destiny. The only way you're ever going to know what God wants you to do is to pick up one of these and to read it. The only way you're going to make it to that street of gold is to pick up one of these and read it. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Well, I guess we're not going to make it. The second bell, we're probably going to hear little children rustling and running in just a moment. And I've rambled long enough. The last slide is actually an open Bible. But we'll go ahead and stop here, take a moment, gather our children, and then we'll come back in here for a few closing remarks. Thank you. You've all been very kind, very attentive. Oh, look, there it is.
I don't see your wife here.
She's back there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
I've got your check, man. I'll give it to you.
A check?
Yeah.
You're not serious, are you?
Yeah.